This document will present the verbal story prototype of the Taino, narrated from the accounts of the ancestors of the early Paleo-Siberian Boricua all the way to their most recent. This story is a prototype creation of the combination of the verbal, genetic, and anthropological histories of the native Boricua from Puerto Rico and should only be viewed for entertainment purposes only and not a legitimate account of factual history. That being said, I created this story to dive into the forgotten past of the Boricua from the point of view of peoples who would have survived to tell the tale, and to have a taste and a feel of what things would their story say if their story would have been written by ancient Boricua. This is part 1 of the Boricua document, and it reads as follows. The Boricua Record. When I was 7, it came to pass, the time when my people's life changed forever. At the time, I didn't understand much, but we were a group of tribes closely related. Some from other tribes were considered as family, like cousins. There were so many of us. I had a best friend from the tribe just up north to us. She was my same age. Her name was Cuba. I remember her smile was contagious. Cuba could light a room with joy and laughter. We would meet along with all our families at the big centers of trade. We ate goats, lambs, cattle, and an array of things like bread from wheat. We were spiritual and had many festivals. The next morning, we couldn't find my father, mother, and I. The town was in chaos, and the peoples were trying to run towards the coasts, but they were all eventually detained. It was these huge warrior men that began to attack all my tribes at the same time in all parts of our land. The next thing we knew, we were all taken captive just northeast, not too far from our lands. We stopped at the place these monsters called home. It was right next to the seas northeast, and the Iceland just north of that. The monster and his men, I now come to know as Ken, was ordered to follow us further into the lands that we were suddenly exiled to. But Ken had other plans. Instead of letting us go freely, he stayed with us and made us his slaves. My mother, who was 21 years of age, was picked to be a wife for Ken. Ken later targeted most of the children, specifically boys, because they were a threat to him. When it was my turn to go, even as a child, I saw how he treated the wives he picked. After taking the boys out, he proceeded to grab the women by the hair and place them in a line of tied women. It seemed along the way Ken and my mother already had some sort of history and wanted to make my mother his queen amongst his women. My mother was simple, but she was the most beautiful unmatched woman of my tribe, I was said. When Ken came toward me, I knew it was my turn to go, so I ran with all my rage and tackled Ken. I only ended up crashing my face onto his knees. I stand up and Ken towered probably 4 to 5 times the height of my own. He only seemed to get angrier, but he seemingly praised my bravery with a nod, and from the sounds of his language, before kicking my head so hard that I instantly started bleeding from the forehead. He grabs his massive spear, and before it is able to pierce me like he did to all those boys, my mother jumps on me and covers me looking at Ken, who is about to pierce me with the spear. I pass out. The next thing I know is I'm still alive, and that I have been in a critical condition for a few weeks. I don't remember much. Everything went black, and every time I would wake up, I had an unbearable pain in my head. I later realized Ken and his men were who killed my father when the men rebelled against them. Apparently, my mother saved my life. I was told that before I passed out, she gambled her own life so I would survive. She was the only woman brave enough to bargain with him. She knew he wanted her. She told him, "Let my son live as your slave, and I'll also offer you my romance as your queen as well." Before we ever got skewered by him, Ken agreed to my mother's terms. This was the beginning of my pure hatred for Ken and his men. But after attacking him, I began to fear Ken as well, after seeing how useless I truly would be against such a big warrior. We then reach a village where they serve Ken, and Ken leaves with more concubines. This was east of where we originally were. But now, we were headed towards the north, where there was so much snow and ice. We acquired animal skin for cover. I remember seeing the other tribes walking somewhere together with Ken's other men. There were different camps, but some stayed south where we originally were, a few weeks prior. But I did see so much people traveling. We could have been millions. As a young servant, I began to do chores, for except cooking and hunting. Male survivors like me weren't permitted to learn combat. However, one thing really surprised me. When I was working, I saw Ken having the roughest time with one of the more recent concubines from our last stop, a girl named Yue. She came from that same place where we stopped for animal covers. And there was a huge river there as well that crossed the entire country. We filled our water supply and other things apart from Ken's search for wives. Yue was beautiful and she looked so fragile. But I truly believe Yue almost killed Ken that day. Even though Ken saw her as a playful joke, I witnessed her movements and she moved like a killer. She even pinned him to the ground a few times. I would say, how can somebody so small like Yue pinch such a massive warrior like Ken? We finally reached a place in the north of the huge river close to the mountains, where we settled, and there Ken creates a brutal society, enslaving us in his different settlements. Some were next to the mountains, but us from Ken's camp were closer to the colder plains. It was Ken and his men. This was the place of their favorite megafauna meat, and they were many. I saw 30 of Ken's men take down some of these massive creatures easily, and some would only use their hands. When Ken and his men left to hunt, I took the opportunity to speak with Yue. I would walk freely along his camp cause the queen was my mother. I tried to speak with Yue, but she couldn't understand me, so I used hand signs and emotions. Yue understood perfectly the first time and agreed to train me, where I experienced pain like I've never imagined possible. Yue was my friend. Her training broke me, and even almost all my bones. The things she would be able to do seemed like magic. She could kill any of Ken's warriors if she really wanted to. She taught me to stay skinny to hide my abilities. I couldn't get fat even if I really wanted to anyways. I was thin as a twig, just like Yue. In 2 months, I had already become very strong and skilled from working very hard. I wanted to end Ken, but I was still too small and weak to face the likes of a warrior around 8 cubits in height. I wasn't enough, at least not yet. At this same time, I'm 8 years old. A few weeks later from that, I find myself with a baby brother named Toro. Toro was very heavy and almost as big as I was, and my mom was later expecting another. The settlements were now villages with a hierarchical society. In a year, our language was getting influences from US's people, my own people, and Ken's men. The more fluent ones were the children of Ken's warriors. Even as time passed, I grew even more hate for Ken and his men. Sometimes I couldn't wait to execute my plan. I missed my best friend, my father, and my old life. Why were we ever thrown into this cold hell in the first place? A few years pass and I'm already 14. I work every day with chores and still train every night in secret. Our village traded some goods, and a lot of nations were trying to invade Ken. Ken always kept them at bay with his massive body and his bigger reputation for war. My brother, Toro, was already almost as tall as me, and he was only 6, but he was becoming a great hunter. Apparently, Ken's peoples are born warriors. Yue also had a baby from Ken. One day, Ken decides to seek new women. I had heard they found the next queen for Ken. As my mother, even though beautiful as she was still reaching the age of 30 in a few years. This was one of the things that I mostly hated about Ken, apart from all the suffering he put us through. Like always, we could do nothing. I only needed 3 more years to reach a greater potential where I could be a little bigger and more prepared. But I was already secretly among the best warriors in Ken's settlement of thousands of people. When they bring women, they bring them from the 2 main sources. Some from UA's people, and the others from my own confederation of tribes who are tormented by these warrior men. We all witnessed their arrivals. Some girls are from our local village, the one where Ken's camp resides. Absolutely gorgeous women tied with ropes began to walk in the camp with the guards. There I saw her. It was my best friend who I thought could have been dead from all the chaos. It was her. It was my best friend from before we were exiled. It's Cuba. As I see Cuba, I can tell the distress in her face, and I know she doesn't want to marry Ken. She sees me, and for a second her emotions changed and she gave me a soft look. of relief that I was alive. I felt the same way as my tears went down. She then changes her look away because of what is about to happen. The young women were taken straight into Ken's tent. I started to tremble in anger and to breathe erratically. My mother knew, so she touched me in the back, but I walked away trying to remain calm. It wasn't my time yet, but I didn't want Cuba to walk in that tent. I couldn't control my jealousy, which made me run towards the guards, and I took out 3 that were nearest to Cuba. I broke the ropes from Cuba and picked her up and tried to run away with her. In the commotion, Ken is self-alerted and jumps from within the tent and tumbles my running, so I fall. He grabs onto Cuba, and I try to pull her away, but he surprised me by stabbing me in the chest with a small dagger he had inside his robe. I started to bleed so much that my vision for a moment began to fade. I was going to die again, like that time I was 7. I ruined my 7-year-long plan. I can fight him, but his soldiers were close, and he was thrown his spear. But when he threw the spear with his blinding anger at me to kill me, my mother jumps on the spear and is severely impaled by it and falling onto the floor. I've never felt such anger upon then. My heart sunk so low, it was hard to breathe even. I walked slowly towards my mother. She tried to tell me something, and I hold her hand, not knowing what to do to help. She's fighting to stay alive. She tells me, "Don't worry. It's an honor to die for my young, strong man. It's okay. You did the right thing. Whatever happens, it will be fine. Just stay alive. Come back another day and retrieve Cuba. Now go, leave!" Ken's men run to detain me, but he stops them and tells me to exile the village. I turn around and run away as fast as I can. With my peripheral vision, I can see Ken walking slowly towards my mother with low shoulders. The guards notice too, so they become silent. As I run for 30 leagues away from the camp, all I can see is the lights of the campfires. And then I heard the loudest gut-wrenching roar that I have ever heard from Ken. So angry and so mighty, I could see the shadow of birds and animals scare off away. At that second, I had no doubt in my mind my mother died most likely in Ken's arms. I was angry, but so deeply sad. My adrenaline kept me going. If not, I would have fainted any second, and I had ice on my chest to stop the bleeding. I ran for what it felt a full day while crying for mother. And for the sake of my own sanity, I had to remove Cuba entirely from my mind. Lest I not done so, I really would have turned back, which would have ended with my life, defeating the purpose of all sacrifices made. This was the hardest decision in my life. I began to slowly faint, but I fight it. I need to keep my distance from Ken. I still knew I was too close. I fell down next to a pine tree within the forest and faint, not knowing what would happen. When I wake up, I'm relieved I'm still alive. It's actually slightly warmer, but I wasn't sure where I was. Immediately a group entered my tent. They were just like Yue. They said they knew who I was. They even brought peoples from my tribe. Boys just like me, who were able to escape from Ken. But these were trained just like Yue. All of them were incredible and actually better than me. But they all reminded me of exactly how good Yue was, and that I was found next to the great river just south. I was confused now, but how? It takes 3 days by foot unless you have a horse, and I only ran for a day. They said it was Yue who brought me to the great river, and told me that Yue is actually a secret weapon who was born and raised to finish with Ken and his men, to avenge thousands that died who are from the great river, and that was her only purpose. Now, it all made sense to me. I stayed with them for 3 months, healing and perfecting my skills. I was already 15 and a half, and my obsession made me become the strongest and fastest warrior of all the villages. My new group knew my drive was a special force that would advance further our plans. So even though they were calculated leaders, they respected my resolve. So when I healed and was fully ready, I mobilized them just northeast of Ken's camp and created a hard-to-reach headquarters if we were ever going to need to retreat. We were getting ready to invade Ken's camp in our new hideout. I couldn't take mother, father, and Toro from my mind, and how deeply I wanted to end with Ken once and for all. But now, after what happened, I can't stop thinking of a new person who I thought might have not survived this hell. She was my best friend when we were 7, and I would have never imagined that after 7 years she would become so beautiful. I just wish I could have witnessed those dark eyes looking at me one more time. They could help me forget everything, all the suffering, and all the anguish when I dove into her hypnotic gaze. When we looked at each other, we instantly recognized ourselves, like if time never moved for us before the day Ken and his men invaded our villages 7 years ago. However, needless to say, I could barely sleep each night thinking of him. Let's leave it at that. There are very important reasons why I was forced to run from Ken as I did. I know he said I was exiled, but I lived in Ken's camp for 7 years. After Ken exiles a member of the camp, he then proceeds to hunt him and feed the victim to his dogs. I was lucky to be breathing. In the beginning, the freezing temperatures were unbearable to me. But after all that Ken did to me, I became like a wild predator, where I made the unforgiving taiga my playground. I knew I wasn't going to grow much more taller than I already was, and Ken still towered over me almost twice my height. My group and I made a pact that would unite us like a clan. We delegated our lives to each other. Preparing myself physically, I would endure running for hours with weights that slowly became greater than that of Ken himself, if I wanted somehow to close the strength gap between us. There's a few things Ken would never come close to us at all, even if he tried, and that's sheer intelligence, mastery, and boldness. I find myself a part of a group of warriors now, some from US's people and some from my own. One of them was very cunning and one of the most loyal people I have ever met. His name was Yi, and apparently they are all relatives of Yue as well, nomads. A people broken by the crimes of Ken and his men. As we gathered by the fire days before we invade Ken's camp, Yi and the others looked at me as they wanted to show me something. Yi hands me a small scroll written by Yue and told me she had tied the scroll onto my thigh. At that time, only very specialized warriors and members of the ruling class knew how to read and write. The message, to my surprise, said, "Yue fail you. Yue is secret weapon, but Yue is also girl." Yue almost assassin Ken many time, but then Ken show me Ken broken inside. Ken show me Ken not afraid to die. Yue ended fighting for Ken attention amongst the other girl. Yue obsessed with Ken, so Yue thrive inside of Ken wife world. If Ken touched girl in the hair and the face, then Yue wanted Ken only to touch Yue, only Yue in the face, and to only caress Yue in the hair. The boy Ako delivered humanity back into Yue. Yue saw Ako hurt every day. Yue could tell when looking into eyes. Yue taught Ako everything Yue know. Ako carries a torch of burning fire. Please take care of Ako. Yue. After we read the letter, we were confused, but we didn't say much about Yue's message. Yi was afraid Yue could become corrupted, he said. It was something we couldn't understand. It's a situation we couldn't control. Yi seemed very betrayed at first, but I can tell he brushed it up pretty quick. She also gives us a warning that Ken is expanding his army, that he might take a trip, and this would mean not only that more danger was headed our way, but that also Ken would take Kuba with him, knowing I still exist. And that now I only have a small window and it happens to be just next to be close to our invasion of Ken's camp. And we needed to move fast. We go there at night when a storm hits Ken's lands. We start by eliminating somewhere between 100 guards upon infiltration, in the middle of a snowstorm. That way, there will be a delay when they call for reinforcements. After clearing the camp of threats, I looked for Toro and I looked for Yue, but I couldn't find them immediately. I quickly follow onto where they told us Cuba would be. When I run through Ken's tent, I finally find her. She's in a room sitting down with her back toward me. She turns to look at me, and time stopped again for us. It's Cuba. I tell her hi, and she also responds by greeting me. Time quickly started moving again, however, because she turns around to face me completely, revealing she's holding a newborn that resembled how big Toro was when he was a baby. A baby from Ken. I stare in silence for what it felt to be 5 minutes. In fact, it was only 3 seconds. But before I could display another soul-dragging emotion further, my brother Toro jumps out of a hiding spot toward me, yelling, "For mother!" For the next 3 minutes, Toro attempts to assassinate me, but something is off. Ken reveals himself, pleased to know Toro, his son, was avenging mother. "Yes, I do too," I said. "I do too blame myself for mother's tragic end as well." Toro was now slightly taller than me at the age of 7. As Toro fights me, Ken says that Toro was born way ahead of other warriors. I hold my own against Toro. And Ken said I was going to die by my youngest brother's hands. But even though I killed 3 of his guards when I was exiled, somehow Ken still doesn't understand my true skill. This time, I'm ready. No matter who decides to enter the room, I still carry an element of surprise. Even if I could easily block and dodge Toro, I wasn't gonna kill my brother. I'm putting my body in front of Cuba and the child as a shield so that way Ken can take her easily this time. I'm overwhelming Ken and Toro with sheer speed and concentration. After 2 minutes of predicting their coordinated movements, I managed to defend myself against Toro, responding with moves of perfection. I use Ken's own weight against him when he dashes for Cuba, causing him to fall out the tent into a ravine just next to the tent. At that moment, my brother tried to put me into a wrestling submission, but I only permit him to hold my hands, and he tells me, suddenly changing his aggressive demeanor into the Toro that I know, saying, "Big brother, I'm faking my vengeance for mother against you. Can't you tell? Because I know you had a hard decision. You took care of me when others were occupied. I know this was not your fault. We heard the invasion go off and Ken was going to jump and surprise you. Don't worry. I can tell I wasn't gonna hurt you even if I wanted to. I never knew, but I can tell. You're a master. I wanted to also tell you there's something off about Ken. He's not himself anymore. I'll give you a window to escape, brother. Ako, I love you, brother. As much as I honor father, I know mother left this world because of his actions. And maybe, just maybe, he may see it. All I can do is help you right now for the resentment I feel for father. He feels I'm the only thing connecting him to mother. If I don't do this, he will follow you non-stop." Toro kicks my dagger and manages to attain it. And when he picks up the dagger, he stabs himself in the thigh. He quickly swipes it and tosses it back at me. He tells me to go, as we can hear Ken running towards the tent, and says he'll tell Ken how I spared him, and that Ken won't care about anything else until he takes Toro to the nursery, which it will give me more time to escape with the others. I know I left Yue, but seems she didn't want to come. Yi told me nobody there can kill her anyway. Toro stayed, but I can tell he actually matured in a year. My brother seemed as smart as an adult, and I truly wonder if this was linked to mother's death. Nonetheless, this wasn't like the last time. Holding Cuba and the child felt like the weight of feathers. I ran with all I got, and I could see 2 of Kansas wolf dogs approaching me. I've never seen them so excited to hunt, but there's something about this storm that makes things that much more challenging. They then cannot seem to retain that speed for much longer and give out chase. I then see the signs of my group's checkpoints. They all made it back, and by now should have seen my own signs that I was going back to our location. Our horses were at half a day's distance, and then about a week by horse. While running, there was no obstacle that could detach my eyes from the eyes of Cuba. The black bear wasn't stronger, and the Siberian tiger could not match the speed and dexterity that came with the monster born in me, that rose from the pits of pain, that got locked into the chambers of loss, losing everything I once knew, Now I can see it clearly. Now I live for another. She stares at me as I'm running. Her eyes illuminate my darkness, and she whispers to me, "In my time captive, I lost all hope. But before my tribe got attacked, I dreamt of a strong warrior that would come and sweep me off my feet and save me." The warrior's strength was unmatched by any man. You are not the child that I knew 7 years ago anymore. That great and brave warrior that I dreamt with 7 years ago, that would save me and sweep me off my feet. It was you. After a year of awaiting Kansas' response attack, we created a village. Our perimeter wasn't obvious, but we had skilled men protecting our borders through secret communication tactics we created. I proposed to Cuba, to which she said yes. Cuba and I got married, and short after, Cuba gives birth to my firstborn. Yi and the others were also with their families, marrying and also having children. Ceremonies and celebrations were done with precautions and were cut pretty short after we encountered Kansas hunter groups. We dealt with them easily and with no mercy. I promised all of them nobody was going to die anymore. Now, we were going to find a way to retrieve all the tribes. And we knew this wasn't going to be easy. My fellow tribesmen asked to speak to me and say that they have somebody important they want me to meet. He was able to save his grandfather from Kansas camps, an elder from my own tribe, my own people, before we got invaded around 9 years ago and a half. And he would instill in us the values and the origins of my people, so that through all of the storm, my people may still remember who they really are. I go towards the person that my fellow tribeman Kamchatka wanted me to meet with urgency. However, in the midst of this, we were planning to head out back to Kansas land. As we are arriving Kamchatka's tent, I see this man. It's a very old man. We had to wait for others because apparently he was sharing this story with most of our new clan, specifically the people from our tribes. It was at that same time that my spies come to inform that Kansas camp had only a few guards protecting our tribes from escaping. He tells us that most of his warriors went slightly northwest for some reason, that Ken left with them, leaving somebody else regent for the time being. The old man then talks to me in our old tribe's language, saying not to leave. He told me I had to listen to our tribe's story. He wanted me to tell everybody our story in a campfire setting, but he thought my warriors and I had a high chance of survival. He said our unbreakable souls would keep the story of our origins alive long after our blood is dispersed along the world. Kamchatka looks at me, and just like myself, he too wants to go. We must. This could be our greatest chance. We had a window to deliver my people from further captivity. And even as the old man becomes sad due to his advanced age and having such little time, we knew we had to leave. So I go with half of my warriors down to Kansas land. And after we drop our horses at the first checkpoint, we didn't even have time to run a third of the distance from the checkpoint to Kansas land before my spy arrives running towards us, panicking and very fatigued. He even broke the silence code we had as rule. Whatever was happening must have been bad. He tells us that around 10,000 horsemen are entering Kansas lands. I thought, oh no, we were too late. My spy says that these are new troops acquired by Ken. My warriors and I feel the ground with our fingers, and some put their ears near the snowy ground. We nod at ourselves, the fact that it feels like many horses are galloping together. It felt like a small but constant earthquake getting closer and stronger by the second. I asked him, "Are you being followed?" He says that he was captured by a wanderer from these new horsemen, and tells me that he managed to kill the man and the horse before running back towards us. He understood the task. Killing him would give us more time to escape, and leave them with the uncertainty. even though we know that they are not that stupid. Going back to our own camp took us about 3 weeks. When we get there, I secure my perimeter like never before. My mind was concerned. I wasn't gonna let not one of my new tribe or my family die. I was set to find the freedom and the happiness that my tribe yearned for. But upon entering Kamchatka's camp, we found the old man was borderline dying. So my warriors and I, quiet and respectfully, enter the tent. The old man tells us that he will start by the middle of the story, and he says,
My name is not of this cold region. My name is Petros Bo Ephrael. I'm very old. Petros is my name. The other part, Bo Ephrael, means the son of the great Lord Ephraim. He who only a few hundred years in the past was the patriarch of our tribe. I'm Petros, the great-grandson of Ephraim, and Manasseh, his brother, the patriarch of your wife Cuba. Our tribes are named after our patriarchs. Young Akko. Our tribe is called Ephraim, and you are the spitting image of him. Before we got expelled from our lands, recently about 10 years ago, our tribes were located in the lands of Israel. These two brothers, Ephraim and Manasseh, in particular come from a powerful governor and agricultural expert named Joseph. Although he was the governor, he was not from that place which he governed, nor his wife. Some say she was from this place. This place was called the land of Mizraim. Others called it Kemet. Joseph was a Hebrew or Hebrew, just like the rest of us. The wives that were chosen for most Hebrew were that of Aram, which is the place where the people of Javan were situated in the beginning. Her name, the wife of Joseph, was Asenath. Our tribe, the tribe of Ephraim, and Manasseh, your wife's tribe, are brother tribes. This is a glimpse of our tribe's ancestry. The patriarch of all was a king named Sayasudra, and also goes by the name Utnapishtim. He begot Shem, the father of Semites, who begot Arphaxad, who begot Selah, who begot Heber, who begot Peleg, who begot Reu, who begot Sirog, then Terah, and then Abraham, father of all our tribes. The lineage of the Hellenistic wives Semites would acquire goes from Sayasudra to Japhet, who begot Javan. We were living in South Mesopotamia, although us Semites we lived in many places like and Haran, and in different times some in the lands of Canaan and Mizraim, and so on. At a rough moment for us, when we were still just called Semites, when we still had not settled the Levant and our promised lands, our people's prince-like figure Joktan, also son of Heber, and the brother of Peleg, our other patriarch, smuggled us out of Shinar during the construction of the world's tallest ziggurat. We were ordered to partake in the bricklaying labor, to which we declined, and had to leave the cities and hide in the mountains, declining meant that Nimrod would persecute us. This construction of Nimrod's ziggurat went against our spirituality. This construction would offend our God. I learned how it was prophesied that we would be exiled from our own lands. We would be targeted because of our own beliefs that went against that of the spirituality of the Assyrians. Our priests would later discern that one of the reasons that we were going to be expelled from the lands that were promised to us, apart from the growing enemy, was also because it was said that our people's walk would eventually be taking off course. We failed to follow divine instruction. This worsened because of my generation and the rebellion of one of our patriarchs named Jakub. In ways, we would eventually give our backs to our own faith. The prophecy of our peoples affirms that our destiny is to be fruitful and that we will blend into many nations around the world. We are Hibaro, and we are chosen by Him. Don't ever forget it. Manage to stay alive and find a place for our people. Be grateful for the others that have assisted us along the way. We are all brothers and sisters. I literally mean that. But I need to rest.
He begins to fade from us, but I ask him, "Who is this him of which you speak?" He replies,
His name is the name above all other names.
I ask him again, "But who is he?" Petros Bo Ephrael then responds,
Let him who seeks cease not to seek until he finds.
Petros' face gets colder and paler each second, and his face fixes frozen. His medic gets alarmed and treats him, also walking us out the tent. We needed to help him recover, or did he mean he really needed to rest, as we humans refer to when we are going to pass away? This is what I understood indeed. So all of us had obvious reasons to doubt. But as we wait a couple of minutes outside the camp before leaving, the medic walks outside of the tent. She looks over at us, closes her eyes, and moves her head from side to side saying, "No, Kamchatka." Even as tough as he was, it really was another moment of ripping agony. I could see by the shining of his eyes that his eyes had tears. I understood the feeling, but from my own perspective, it's as if Petros Bo Ephrael symbolized the spirit of our people, disappearing like dust into the wind. His death took a small toll on me, but as we bury him, many of our newborn babies began to cry in unison. Upon hearing their cries, I could see the spirit of my people still burning and very much alive. Their cries reminded me we can still live and move forward after all that has occurred within the last 10 years. I still needed to deliver my people from Ken. And now, I have a new mission: to learn all that I can about the story of my people, and to preserve the lives and the memories of my people. Like, share, and subscribe. This is Abakétonë Borikéj, and I'll see you on the next video.